So, so what I think is really interesting is, on the one hand, there's Chris, the guy that works for an organization full of people who have had just stellar careers and sold a bunch and done big numbers, and you work with really big clients to deliver your product and the solution that it provides. And yet the work that the clients are doing with your product very much looks like what most of us have to do on a day in and day out basis from a sales activity perspective. No?
Oh yeah, pretty much. They got, for one thing, they got to go find people to sell to.
And put it together in a way that maybe the phone might ring. And now I need to be able to say something in that moment to be able to entice that prospect to continue the conversation with me. So while Chris, you and I in some ways would say like, oh my God, there's so much about selling that is different than it used to be, nothing replaces those first 7 seconds when you're trying to get someone's attention and you have that opportunity, right? So in your opinion, how is it the same these days, and how has it changed? And what's your advice for people who are desperately afraid to pick up the phone and call somebody?
Ooh, 3 questions. I like it. So what stayed the same is just the most fundamental thing about B2B. And we only know about B2B. I don't know anything about B2C. I suck as a consumer. If you ask me whether I should buy a Tesla or another copy of my 22-year-old Ford Excursion, I probably would hem and haw quite a little bit. But I know a little something about B2B because I've been immersed in it for 40 something years and started studying it, I'm afraid, when I was inadvertently at the age of 8 reading Peter Drucker and stuff like that. What did I know? The books were in the house. We lived out in the desert, and you had to read something. At least I did. So the one thing has always stayed the same in B2B, which is it's a scary business being a B2B buyer, a person who's responsible for a considered purchase. Your career is on the line. It's on the line. It's kind of an all downside situation, actually. It's like, okay, we asked you to make sure that we got the right system XYZ, the right thing to solve, whatever. And so you get the right thing and you're at neutral, and you get the wrong thing, which is almost everything, and you're sort of screwed. So that's the nature of the beast. And it's only brave people who are decision makers in the world of B2B buying, but they're brave and they're cautious at the same time because they're rational. They know they're putting their kids' college education, their career, I'm overstating it, but I'm not overstating it, right? Because when you're afraid of something, you're really afraid of it. It's all there is to it.
Yeah.
So that's never changed. And I think that's the bedrock of B2B. And that's what folks often forget when they think, oh, things are changing. Well, maybe it'll become like B2C. The way it works is this: if I buy a Tesla and then I find out I'm allergic to electricity, and I got to dump that car because, it just turns out, oh my God, I didn't know that electrons are, make me sneeze or something. Then what am I out? I'm out some money. That's it. I do the same thing at the same price point, a little $70,000 system or whatever for my company. And say I'm in my position, I'm the CEO, and I screw it up. I get the wrong vendor. The thing doesn't integrate. People hate it. That's a real problem. And so I'm going to be cautious. And my problem is I'm a cautious generalist being sold to by a specialist who knows more than me. So in general, I'm going to go with no decision. And that's why B2B is full of no decision. That just never changes. Folks talk about no decision like you could overcome no decision with this closing technique or this or that. Trust me, until they trust you more than they trust themselves, they're going with no decision. They start with no decision. They're staying with no decision until they trust you more than they trust themselves. Not more than they trust the other guy, more than they trust themselves, because you're the expert and they're the generalist.
Okay. And so this is intriguing. All right. So we're gonna unpack this. If you guys are not nerdy salespeople, you're gonna probably shut this off pretty quick, because we're gonna get in here. Okay, because no decision is like fist bump, dude. That is the God's honest truth. It's not me or somebody else. It's me or I just won't do anything. Right. And there's actually formulaic equations that have been created by mathematicians to try to break this concept down into something that we can study. And as a field of study, it's fascinating to examine the characteristics. And we as salespeople have a tendency to overgeneralize when we talk about trust. and say, people buy from people they know, like, and trust, first of all, with not a very good understanding of what that even means, but more so, not even really understanding what the word trust really means, because it's a slippery word. It means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And so by creating an environment where you can be crystal clear about what trust looks like to you, what you're doing in that process of trying to build to a decision, no decision moment with that buyer is you've put them in that position that you've described. But now the most amazing thing that happened, Chris, is during the pandemic, the stakes got higher.
Mm-hmm.
So before, the no decision was, I'm just going to stick with my original vendor. Now the no decision is, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing. And that's a very different no decision scenario than in the pre-pandemic, when it was just, I don't have time because we're so busy trying to get our orders out the door that I don't really have time to evaluate you against my existing vendor. So you may be better, but I don't have time to care. Now, oh my God, you look like you would be such a better vendor for me, but I'm desperately afraid that if I make the wrong choice, that not only might this somehow negatively affect our morale, our culture, like what if it bankrupts our company? What if we get canceled because the choice we made is somehow so unpopular that all of my employees go on Glassdoor and write negative reviews of me, and now no one wants to work here? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you hit upon this is the biggest change. And this is the change that was triggered by the pandemic, but is not actually part of the pandemic at all. And people get very confused about this in general. Folks are conflating stuff that has to do with the pandemic while it's running and stuff that has to do with changes that were triggered by the pandemic that are now permanent. And the biggest change that was triggered by the pandemic and is now permanent is a reasonable subset of our economy discovered that they can work from anywhere. And while that doesn't affect every job, it does affect every job, because people are married to other people. People are living in various, they don't just live alone like here's my little unit and I got them to move over here and they're in my, within commute distance of where my company's headquarters or factory or whatever is, and now they're stuck, right? So this is the thing that has generally gone away, not 100%, but it has gone away in a big way. And that is the subsidy we used to get from the lack of ability of people to work for somebody far away from where they live, which basically allowed us as employers to pay down instead of paying up because this person was stuck. They're stuck. It's a funny word to use, but they really were stuck. They're stuck in their neighborhood. They're stuck in their community. They're stuck at their church. They're stuck because that's what they love. And now the question is, do they love their job? And then it's going to come down to, do you love them? And, people don't love what doesn't love back. And it's not very common for employers to think about, loving the people who work for them, but that's new. And that is new and it's permanent. And folks who think that it's going to reverse someday, where the employer is going to have that upper hand and is going to be able to basically sort of order people where to live and how to live, those people are going to be outcompeted by people who can get that talent and get it more flexibly. So the biggest change, I think, is that we used to, I think, correctly imagine that everybody was desperate for cash. They needed to make a living. They are their own racehorses. That is, they eat while they sleep, right? Their overhead is burning their life away in an economic kind of sense. And therefore, our job that we're offering them has the feel of a lifeline. And they're stuck with us or other employers who are within reach. And given how many things have moved overseas in the supply chain, a lot of those jobs are already out of reach, so to speak, to commuters. So now you have this very interesting situation of 30 years of offshoring and a pandemic that sent the knowledge workers home, and you kind of get a 2-for-1. Mm-hmm. And that 2-for-1 means us employers no longer get the subsidy. We actually have got to figure out how to make these jobs much more, not just palatable, but something that you want to be part of somehow. And I think that's a tough one for a lot of employers. and they're grappling with it. My fiance, Helen, she's writing a book on this subject. It's called, she's a tough-minded MIT engineer who happens to be in the upper ranks of sales at one of the biggest companies in the world, maybe the biggest company in the world by value. And she carries, a quota that's got a lot of zeros, a lot more than I do. And she's writing a book called Love Your Team. And it's a hard-nosed handbook on sales management in the hybrid world. And the hybrid world goes on forever. That's what we live in now. So that has changed. So the change isn't so much the people you're selling to, the human element of getting trust. And by the way, it's the order is not know, like, and trust. You got to be trusted first. If you're going to be trusted more than somebody trusts themselves eventually, your first step has to be trust. You're not going to get to that last one unless you take it as your first one and then don't blow it. Yeah. So that has not changed. I think in that sense, very little has changed about B2B sales. It's a little harder to get a hold of people. And that's just a fact. I mean, that's what our business does, is we make that problem go away. But the fact that we can make it go away makes it not actually very interesting.
Well, I want to rewind the tape just for a second. So, like, the only thing nuance-wise that I've been able to point at and say, hey, this is how selling as a discipline has been dramatically impacted by the way we have to do the things we ordinarily did pre-pandemic. Most of the time in high stakes selling, especially, but this is pretty universal, but especially when it's enterprise level selling, the stuff you find out in the intimate, off the cuff, not during the actual meeting conversations, are the things that both the buyer and seller knew that they could look forward to exchange what really needed to be shared in a way that would allow for the transaction to continue. And we've lost it. And the second part of the work from anywhere dynamic is, now I may not be able even to get you, like, I might have to fly halfway around the world to try to make that happen, because the workforce that we're selling to now could be literally anywhere. So how can we take those quiet, intimate discussions we used to have and create a new forum for them in a way that still fosters their, their existence, so that what's happened in the replacement of that is the sales cycle itself is gotten enormously long by comparison. And it's because we've lost those chances. So you're participating at the high end of the spectrum. Your wife is participating at the high end of the spectrum. Are you seeing a similar situation there, or how does what you're seeing compare and contrast?
Well, I'd make two distinctions. So one is the not being able to physically get together with people is not really a side effect of work from anywhere as much as it is a temporary, I'll call it, we don't know how temporary, but a temporary phenomenon within the pandemic itself.
Agreed.
So it's like, you're so far underwater, can you hold your breath long enough to get to the surface? Sure. Right? Most folks can. The world's awash in cash, and companies that have futures have really no difficulty fundamentally in acquiring I'll call it, it's a form of working capital, right? It's a buffer that takes you from A to B, which is what working capital is designed to do. Sure. And so and money's always looking to go to work. There's so much money that's looking to go to work. So now it comes down to not can you do this, but can you do it credibly, at least as well as your competitors, and preferably better, because everybody's in the same boat. So in a sense, everybody's in the same boat. So it's irrelevant, because you're going to run out of money or not. If you arrange not to run out of money, then what's it going to be like afterwards? Because there will be an afterwards. Now, what does the afterwards look like? Industry by industry is going to look real different. So some industries, people will truly be at the quote unquote office. Onshore factories are more like that than most, but their knowledge workers may not be there. But getting together physically with people is actually pretty easy when you don't have all of these other restrictions going on. It's easy to arrange. We've all done it. We do it at conferences, but maybe we're gonna do it a little bit more at I'll call it not at the office of our prospect, but at some place close by that's convenient to the person. And in fact, I actually think those meetings will be better because they won't have any of the trappings of the office. I just had a meeting recently with somebody we're partnering with. He flew up to Seattle and we sat in a hotel lobby for 6 hours and probably got 2 years worth of work done in terms of understanding each other, that intimacy. And that is culminating in perhaps a major change in a major industry that's going to occur that will be interesting to see how it plays out. It required that, but we could do it. And even in the pandemic, it was a flight to Seattle. I mean, how hard is that, right? But it's all relative. It's relative to your competitors. What do they get to do? What do they have to do? What do you have to do? What do you get to do? So that stuff I don't think has changed that much. When I watch what Helen is doing, it's really interesting. The conversations, those offline conversations, those intimate conversations, they still take place, but they tend to take place with a text message followed by a cell phone call. And they're not within the Zoom world. They're not within that context. They're the thing before, the thing after.
Yep.
And there's some of that always going on. I do it myself. I have one right now at the end of this conversation where I'll be getting on with somebody who's actually very highly placed in this company that I do business with, who's going to be helping me out thinking through some details of a concept that I have for our next year together. The text message came in while I was on my previous podcast as a host, and the conversation will take place, and it'll be plenty intimate because it's just the two of us. So I actually think there's a lot of ways to get that stuff done. But long sales cycles, if they're a feature of your sector, they're irrelevant unless you run out of money. It's as simple as that. I mean, that's always been true of business, right? It's like, well, it's raining everywhere. Okay, well, do you have an umbrella? Because if you have one and nobody else has one, it's good that it's raining. And stop about the rain.
Right. Yeah, it's we sense a lot of friction because all of the elements that you just outlined are really, there's no debate. I mean, all of those things are true. If you're operating a business, what's going on with cash flow and liquidity. It's obvious that the government is going to prop us up and make sure that there's stuff to be spent on. And yeah, it's more expensive, and that has a lot to do with the lack of supply that we have, but we know there's product. It's just breaking the dam. So we expect that the inflationary period should recede at some point in the future. They can't leave that shit out there forever. So we have to expect that those things will start to return to normal. So if it all has changed and yet it's all stayed the same, where would you suggest for those of us who maybe aren't operating at the EBITDA numbers that you're dealing with when it comes to the different things that we might be paying attention to when it comes to our sales efforts in 2022?
Well, my advice to everybody is always a little contradictory to what they're generally going to hear. So when supply is short, build massive pipeline, demand pipeline. You can't do anything about the short supply. You got to wait it out, right? Sure, you got to treat your sourcing and procurement activities as though they're sales activities, and you got to put more oomph behind them, right? You got to be ready to decide, do I want external money as a buffer, or am I willing to take the same money in the form of paying up for supply? Because it's the same stuff in the business equation. It just has got different liquidity and different time structures around it. But when you come right down to it, it's all just money, right? And by the way, if you don't understand how money works, and you're in business, I highly recommend you figure this out.
Or find somebody to help you quickly.
Get a partner, a mentor, or whatever. And there are people who are really good at taking you through this and saying, well, wait a minute, this is the same as that. Things that you think are different are actually the same thing. And when it comes to money, money is always the same thing. That's the definition of money. It's the thing that always becomes the same thing, even though it looks like a different thing, right? And then you have these questions of liquidity. Inventory has less liquidity than cash. Okay, that's just the way it is. You can generally dump one easier than the other. But the thing that will determine your actual success is not the size of your pipeline, but it's the breadth of your pipeline as things start to turn, because that gives you more options, more choices. My dad told me something a long time ago, and he was not big into giving business advice, even though he's a very good business guy. But he said, you're never any better than your worst customer.
Mm.
And that's a question of choice. And that's where quantity becomes quality. Then, by quantity, I don't mean quantity of dollars. We tend to seek quantity of dollars in our pipeline. But in a portfolio sense, what we want is quantity of choices of who we're going to do business with. When we're in uncertain times, we should maximize the number of choices we have as things start to play out, because the definition of uncertainty is we don't know how they're going to play out.
Right.
So get a big portfolio of what the other guy's not getting, which is the trust relationships at all sorts of stages, right? So I say pave the market with trust, and then harvest that trust over the time allotted to you by nature.
Yep. Then I've literally banked this stage of my career on that whole sentiment, and playing the long game when there's a lot of stakes is a really, really nerve-wracking game to play in a lot of ways. But having a strong sense of the purpose around why you're doing what you're doing can oftentimes serve as sort of the beacon to get you through periods of rough stretches like this, right? And for us, I mean, I was at I was at $100 million organization who decided one night to declare bankruptcy. I've been through what crisis looks like, and oftentimes it's your willingness to reimagine what it is that you've been up until that moment around the skills that are left after whatever crash occurs. Right. That really gives you the best chance to not only survive, but to see the seams that are available in an economy like the one that's going on right now, because you've been able to do the work necessary to start looking at the marketplace and seeing where the new version of yourself is going to be able to solve a problem for a customer in a time when trust is paramount. If you can be seen as an expert with a solution that people are don't even yet know that they need, and you can show it to them, that's fish in a barrel. I mean, so you're hitting the nail on the head from paving it with trust. But are there specific activities, like, sales-based activities span the gamut? There's so many different things that a salesperson would want to tell you as a sales-based activity. But from a purely building trust perspective, what's the one you would say, like, hey, if you're really trying to do what I'm talking about, do this?
Well, this is where I get a little parochial. I'm stuck, and I have to apologize for being stuck. I run a company called Connect and Sell, and we let people talk to lots of people in B2B. What do I mean? It's like push a button, wait 3 or 4 minutes or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, and talk to somebody on your list. If you can do that, and as much as you want, and it's not cheap, so you kind of have to decide that you want to do it.
Yeah.
And you can build trust in the first 7 seconds of the conversation, which is what Chris Voss, who says the FBI and all those experts have figured out. You have 7 seconds to get somebody to trust you, and you know how to do it. And it's very technical, actually. It's easy, it's straightforward, but it's technical. You've got to show the other person that you see the world through their eyes, and then you have to demonstrate to them that you're competent to solve a problem they have right now. Thank God the problem is you. You just cold called them. So you are competent to solve that problem. And as long as you're just focused on getting trust and you believe that's a win, and then you see what can happen later, which is to talk to them in a different way, not on that call, but on a later call. So if you have a reason that somebody might benefit from having a conversation with you, and you truly believe that they have a good chance of benefiting no matter what the future might bring, then it's really straightforward to actually truly pave the market with high quality trust, right? With trust that's durable. And that is just talk to more people, have meetings with them. I mean, make a list with a hypothesis. If that a hypothesis, you're crazy. Ask yourself, what am I expert at that I can help somebody understand better? What is something that is economically interesting to them about that? What's something that is emotionally concerning to them about that? And what's something that is strategically blocking their way right now to get where they want to go? I probably could help in any of those areas. I'm not 100% sure. If you're 100% sure, you probably are not being realistic. And then have a conversation, brief 5-second, or 5-sentence conversation to get them to take a meeting with you.
Yep.
And talk to them. The fact is, nobody is going to give you opportunities if you don't talk to them, and nobody's going to settle for a cold call. But a cold call is required in order to get into a trust relationship with somebody you don't know. The irony is, you got to ambush people in order to help them. I've got a friend, his name's Scott Webb. He's with a big company called Hub International. And he once told me, he said, the mindset that I have when I cold call somebody is this: I'm pulling them out of the way of a speeding bus.
I love it. I was at an event yesterday with a group of people that it's always good when you're in a room of people that you know are going to stretch you. And what I recognize and realize about that group of entrepreneurs is when they walk up to you, they make you feel like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have this opportunity to talk to you because I know something very specifically about you. I don't know you, but I know people that do what you do. And I know something very specific about a problem that people like you have. And I'm desperate to tell you about it because I know that you're going to be really excited to hear it. And if you don't mean that, it sounds like every bad salesperson you've ever met.
Right.
But if it's true and you actually believe it and you have the goods, then why would you not want to have that conversation with people? But the hard part is the going to the gym part is putting in the time to be able to be in that moment so that when you get that opportunity, you're not full of shit. You actually are saying something that that person really should hear. And that's where the real rubber meets the road, Chris. I mean, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny too. I compare it to surfing. I'm not a surfer, but I know some surfers. And it's like, you think if you were thinking I'm going to become a surfer, would you go out and try to make your own surfboard? You'd be out of your mind, right? There's 80 years of deep experience across generations and hundreds of thousands or millions of surfboards shaped in different ways. And folks have figured that out. So you're a fool to shape your own surfboard.
Right.
And you're a fool to make up your own language around the psychology part of an encounter with another human being. It's studied, understood, and that's where this is really tricky. Folks think, oh, well, I'm natural. I'm a natural kind of sales guy. I can just talk to anybody. No one is natural at handling an ambush where you are a scary, invisible stranger. So they're thinking of their own fear, which is a narcissistic kind of view. You have to be empathetic and think about the other person's fear. You just ambush them and they can't see you. In the environment of evolution, that's the worst thing in the world. That's the people from across the river. And, we're civilized, right? And how do we know we're civilized? Well, we look at each other. We paint our faces vertically. We have a bone in our nose. These are civilized things. Over there across the river, they paint their faces horizontally and they have bones in their ears. Those are terrible people. And when they're invisible, it means it's nighttime. Invisible strangers means bad people here at night. Well, when you cold call somebody, you are a bad person there at night because you're invisible and you're a stranger. That sounds bad. It's a psychologically technical matter to know what to do with that. The odds that you're going to stumble on it are about zero. The odds that you're going to figure this one out for yourself are like the odds you're going to make your own surfboard and then make yourself into a great surfer. Start with some really good beginner surfboard and then learn this thing about your balance and how to be an artist on it first by not just falling off the damn thing. And it takes instruction, it takes practice, and it takes an expert who's going to set it up. That's your script is your surfboard. Have somebody else make it for you. That's a crazy thing to do for yourself. The surfer is the voice, and you're going to work on your voice because your voice carries almost all the information in a first conversation, and your words carry almost none of it. The words are a scaffolding on which your voice is draped in order to make something beautiful.
And the creativity. This is one of my favorite topics, and we're running long, so I'm gonna cut it short. The video version always runs long anyway. We put that one out separate. I'll edit down the audio one. But the thing that's really interesting to me in this portion of the discussion is trying to get people to recognize that the reason why salespeople don't like being in sales are the same reason that bad surfers don't like the surfboard. It's because they don't trust all of what's come before them to just know that, why would I even bother? But if I commit to that, then if it's not successful, it's on me. And that's the most scary part of this.
Yeah.
Right? So I'll rather flail about in the ocean and say that I was trying, knowing full well that the likelihood of my success is almost nil, than to follow the tried and true path that, if I'm willing to commit to, will actually lead to my success, because then I actually have to do the work.
Yeah, and then you have to you got to deal with yourself, which is not pleasant, right? I mean,
Well, and so this is, to me, the favorite part of it is, once you commit to the script, once you've given over to the fact that you don't need to worry about that part of it, that's where the real creativity comes from. Your own voice is, how are you going to deliver what it is you're trying to say based on the reactions you're getting from the different people you're interacting with? Because that's the real improv of sales. Is, I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say. I'm just watching how you react. So I can see if I've done something that seems like it's going to work for you.
I love that you brought up improv. You know, the late Robin Williams is one of the greatest performers in entertainment ever to live. And Robin Williams is generally seen by the public as somebody who was always spontaneous. He was the most scripted, practiced person on earth. Everything he did was scripted. Everything he did was practiced. That's why it was so great. That's why it came off so naturally. That's how he could be himself. He was so practiced, he could always be himself. And
build he'd go off on little tangents, but he always knew he was coming back to the next piece of his skit. And that's what made his work so brilliant, was just like, where would he go with it? Because if you watch the same pieces of when he was doing things, you'd watch, like, one night he'd do it one way, the next night he would sort of go it slightly different, but all told, the plane still flew to the same destination, right?
Yeah, it's like a great surfer can wave to their friend on the beach and not fall off the damn surfboard. Because the waving to the friend on the beach isn't the surfing. They can get away with it, right? You can do a lot of stuff within that envelope. And the funny part is the hard bit, the really hard bit, is the first 7 seconds, and it's also the easiest to learn. You have 7 seconds to get trust. This is a human being. Well, the beauty of cold calling, by the way, is every single person you call has something weird in common. They're all human. That you can rely on. So rely on that. And if you rely on that and you master, what is it like to get another human being to trust you in 7 seconds?
Yeah.
Then essentially you win 100% of the calls. Now, if you want more, and who doesn't, go shoot for more. But if you don't get it, remember, you already won.
I love it. That's awesome. All right. Someone's going to be interested in getting into Chris's universe. How do you want them to go do that?
Well, let's see. I'm chris.beall@connectandsell.com, but I get 897 emails a day, so I'm not sure I'll see anybody's. I'm out on LinkedIn. That's a little easier. At least once a week, I'll check all the invites. So I'm easy to find, Chris Beall, CEO of Connect and Sell. But if you really want to get into my world, check out my podcast with Corey Frank. It's called marketdominanceguys.com. And we've had a couple people actually binge listen for 4 days and then remake their businesses around it. These people are some of the smartest people I know. So either it's really good or smart people are really crazy.
That's awesome. And there may be a little home and home going on here between Roger and Chris. So if we get that piece worked out, and I'm going to end up there, we'll be sure to let all of our listeners know about that conversation where we turn the tables, but I'm going to actually give you a chance. So this is something we've been doing more recently on the video only version. So you're so well versed in the topic that I know sometimes the fun for you is to not even worry about what questions you're being asked, but trying to follow along with your interviewer, like, where the hell is he trying to take me? So having listened to where I was trying to take you, is there anything about that journey that was noteworthy to you that you want to repeat back to me and get my perspective on? Was there one piece of this that you're like, well, I wonder where Burnett comes out on this one thing?
Well, I am curious as you look forward into the sort of, as you describe the changes, I'll call them the macro changes, the money pump that's going on. So you have these two things going on, right? You got this big money pump that's going on. It's going to continue to go on. And then you have this supply chain issue, which is creating everything from spot shortages to chronic shortages all over the place, where it's gotten, there's a lot of uncertainty in one place and a lot of certainty in the other place. Do you see that as resolving? This is gut feel kind of thing, or maybe intellectually you see it as resolving over time in some reasonable way, or do you see it as going nonlinear?
I think that the capitalist system always fills a vacuum. So every time something happens, entrepreneurs scurry to thinking and tinkering and trying to come up with ways to reimagine. I mean, Uber was just, well, what if I need to make my car payment? I mean, like, I'll take a ride for $20 because I need to make my car payment, right? So with that scarcity comes creativity. And to me, I think we have a unique opportunity to create our own lanes in a lot of ways because of the scarcity that has been created. So it's almost as if, like you were talking about before, if I've done a good job up until this point, having created trust relationships with a scalable community, the certainty that I can bring to that group of people by saying, I have a solution for all of your problems in this moment, is the most important thing I could potentially do to scale my business during this really crazy time. And you don't walk in the door today and say that without having done any work with that community up until this point. If you do, that's where you get yourself in all kinds of trouble, right? So either in that instance, we were during the pandemic, we used to give a presentation where we would say that people kind of came out of this and realized that they were one of three people. They were either helpers, hustlers, or hoarders. And depending on where you were in that continuum would largely dictate the way you were going to behave during selling time during the pandemic. If you were a hustler, you didn't give a shit. You would call anybody about anything and they would call you names and tell you never call me again. And you're like, fine, I'll find somebody else, right? That's a hustler. The helper was like, well, I want to figure out a way to like be of assistance to people because that would be consistent with our brand. And then there was the person in between that had product that was trying to help both people.
Yeah.
Right. So in this instance, I would like to be seen by my tribe as the person with the trustworthy answers in what is a very chaotic time. And I'm hoping that I've done the work that you so eloquently describe about paving your territory with trust to give myself the best opportunity to create what you mentioned in the beginning, which is a very robust pipeline wins the day today. And most organizations don't feel the confidence to be going to market sufficiently hard to create a high pipeline value at the top end right now. And that's exactly what should be going on. And there's not enough of it happening. So I think it's really ultimately, it's almost like it's the Kentucky Derby and all the horses went to the gate and some of them are ready to go and the doors opened and bang. And there's other organizations that are slow to get out because they hadn't done the work in that moment, or maybe couldn't even imagine that that was necessary because it just didn't align with their corporate philosophy on the way they went about approaching sales as an activity within their business.
I love it. I love it. So, I mean, creativity, imagination, entrepreneurial drive become currency of a kind. Is the other pump, right? The hidden pump isn't a government money pump. The hidden pump is already there in the very nature of how our economy, how our society is organized.
Yeah. So thank you for asking me that. That's very insightful, because much like we were talking about before, the intimate conversations between people, this is a topic that I speak about often, because I'm attuned to this issue. And as an entrepreneur, I perceive the opportunity to be enormous in this moment. So I'm trying to have as many person-to-person conversations myself about this very topic, so that we together, me and those potential prospects who I believe trust me enough, together we can go. Let's go, because I have solutions to the things that could help you be better at what you do in your market. So let's just go ahead and get to doing that, so that together we can both be successful. And to me, that's at the core of when you're really selling well. You can have that level of a discussion with someone who has the money, the authority, and the need to say, yep, I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's go. I love it. I love
All right,
it.
man. Chris, that was good stuff, man. I appreciate you taking the time, and I look forward to our next discussion.
All right, Roger. Thanks so much for having me on. It's fantastic.